Welcome to Space to Lead, the podcast where leaders and teams come together to learn, grow, and thrive. I'm your host, David LeBlanc, and every episode will explore fresh insights and strategies that inspire leaders to create dynamic, engaging cultures. We'll dive into conversations with leaders and industry experts who are transforming teams and shaping the future of leadership. Whether you're leading from the front or working within a team, Space to Lead is here to spark ideas and help you lead with purpose and passion. So, take a deep breath, make some space, and let's lead together. Our guest today on Space to Lead is Cindy Benning. Cindy has an extensive career in pharmaceutical operations and works as a coach and operational consultant. She's brought both her personal and professional experiences together in the development of her BRAVE leadership model and 5 key virtues that contribute to leading a fulfilled life aligned with our core values. Cindy, it's so great to have you here today.
Hi, David. Yes, it is. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here.
I've been really enjoying the articles you've been writing for Team Shift magazine and the conversation about behavior and shifting behaviors. And I know this is a real passion of yours. So I'd love to create some space today where we can chat a little bit about behaviors and why that is so important for leaders.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great idea. The reason that I kind of thought behavior shift would be a good column for that magazine is because I've worked with tons of leaders over my career, some good, some bad, and I kind of, based on my experience, realized that being a good leader is so much more than what you do, but how you behave, how you interact with other people, who you are as a person. And kind of today I was scrolling social media and I saw this quote from Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so that's kind of aligned with that, where the culture is based on the behavior of the people in the organization. And if you don't have good culture, you can have all the strategy in the world, you can have all the processes in the world, but you're not going to be successful unless you have the right behaviors in your organization as well.
Yeah, gosh, that is so true. And I don't know about your experience, but I notice sometimes that as leaders get more senior, sometimes they can get away with not so great behavior because of their role and because they're more senior.
Mm. That's true. And I've seen it, but I think it's just not sustainable long term. Because what happens is they start to have that not so great behavior and people feel unsafe in that environment. So there's been tons and tons of work done on psychological safety, and that's all part of the behaviors create that psychologically safe environment. And so whenever there's people get comfortable or leaders get comfortable as they become more senior with just push, push, push and not thinking about the people part of it and the relationship part of it, then the psychological safety starts to fail. And that has a tremendous impact on people's ability to get anything done, even they don't want to come to work, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. So is this idea of behavior, was that sort of the starting point of that led you to writing Being Brave?
Um, I guess you could say that. I knew that there were certain behaviors that were important. And the first one that came to me with was authenticity, of course, and Brene Brown's written tons of stuff about that. But then I thought, what are some other things that I've learned that I did or I did not receive that made me a good leader or made me not want to be led by somebody? And it was all about these are can call them virtues, you can call them characteristics, you can call them behaviors, but they're all these 5 virtues that I came up with and called them brave based on the acronym brave and not the being brave is jumping off a cliff, brave. It can lead to that, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So talking about this concept of behaviors, which we're all familiar with, where would you like to take the conversation today?
Maybe could we share? I would love to share with your audience what some of these behaviors are and why they're so important, what they are and why they're so important, and what happens in organizations when leaders kind of embrace and live these behaviors. There's in my book, I also refer to the research that's been done that demonstrates that these behaviors have a positive impact on organizations. And um, when I say impact on organizations, I mean things like creativity and innovation and productivity and people wanting to come to work and being engaged. All of those things. CEOs want that, but for some reason they haven't got to the point where they recognize that their behavior is so critical to achieving those things. You can't just tell people what to do, you know?
Yeah. And sometimes in my experience, they maybe recognize it's needed, but they don't know how to get there. So there's this gap. Excellent. Well, yeah, take it away. Which behavior would you start with?
Well, I'm going to backtrack a little bit and talk about trust, I think, because that psychologically safe environment is rooted in trust. The five dysfunctions of a team talked about, the base having trust. So psychological safety is about having trust. And building trust or creating an environment of trust, again, is about behaviors.
Yeah, so
So
true.
if we talk about psychological safety and we talk about trust, which are so critical to have people engaged and showing up, then we talk about behaviors again. So the first brave behavior is benevolence. And for me, benevolence isn't just, I'm going to be a nice guy today. It's, I'm going to be kind to you. I'm going to do what's in your best interest, though, within the context of the common good. So I don't want to just give you whatever you want. I want to do what's best for you and what's best for the organization. And I want to communicate that in a way that makes you feel like I've considered you.
Mm,
Some people say nice guys finish last, right? But we're not talking about just giving everybody what they want here.
hmm.
Talking about doing what's in their best interest.
Nice. And what I love about how you describe benevolence is that it's clear that two people in that case, they're actually in relationship. And in order to have that, for me to understand not only what I need, but also what you need, there needs to be dialogue and conversation and inquiry and curiosity and all this stuff to be able to create that benevolence that you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Because I can't do what's best for you if I don't understand the whole context.
Yeah,
And then I'm
nice.
listening to you, and then you're knowing that I'm being fair. And fairness is one of the five things that helps people feel safe. So
Mhm.
it's just kind of builds on the David Rock scarf model of the five things that help people feel safe at work, and fairness is one of them, and certainty is one of them. Um, so yeah, so benevolence is linked to psychological safety. It's linked to trust. It's linked to fairness. Just be and it's making people feel like they've been seen, heard, and understood.
Hmm. Hmm.
We all know we heard that a million times in when we were doing our coaching training together, right?
So true. So true. But again, putting it into practice requires real intention and effort. Yeah. Yeah.
And for leaders to actually understand what it means. So that's kind of my passion, is to get this out there and say, this is what it means and why it's important. And here's how you can practice it.
Beautiful. And that's the key. I think that last piece you shared, here's how you can practice it. Sometimes we
Yeah.
actually have to almost set out the behavior so people can start practicing, exercising that muscle so it becomes more natural and part of who they are as a leader.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very nice.
So shall I go on?
Yeah, please do. No,
Let's
I'm
talk about respect, RESPECT. Um, Respect is about, I mean, it's a lot deeper than you would normally think about respect. It's recognizing and honoring the differences in people and doing that in every interaction you have with them, in the way you behave. So it's also about fairness, about them feeling like they're part of the culture. It builds the team culture because there's recognition that I know we're different. We have different opinions. We have different backgrounds. We have different stories, and that's okay. We're at different levels in the organization, even, and that's okay. I still respect that. Your position is this. I don't have to agree with it, but I respect that you have a different opinion than me, or
Mm-hmm.
that you have a different background than me. And I
Yeah.
honor that and I appreciate that as part of the whole organization. We're so fortunate to be able to have those differences, and you start to see different perspectives when you open your mind to everybody has something different to add and something valuable to add. So it's about attaching value to the differences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So as you're talking, I'm getting the sense that, we talk a lot about inclusion in teams and organizations. I'm getting the sense that this idea of inclusion fits under the respect column of the Brave model. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, you've given me a great idea when I talk about this stuff. Inclusion, absolutely. Yeah. So people feeling like they're part of a team culture, um, knowing and feeling safe, because when they know that you respect them, they know that it's safe to speak up as well,
Hmm.
because they
Yes.
know that you're going to respect their opinion. You know,
Yeah.
lots of times that happens to me at home. I respect that you have a different opinion than I do, but I don't have to agree with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
hear you and listen and consider. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Very nice.
Mhm.
And then earlier on in when we first started the conversation, you mentioned authenticity. So tell us a bit more about that.
Authenticity, living in alignment with your values, which means speaking up when something's happening that is you're not aligned with, that gives you typically you have like an emotional response to something because there's misalignment between your beliefs, your core values, and what's going on in your head and what you're receiving. And so you have to speak up when that happens. You don't just go along with every idea that your boss comes up with if you don't agree, because that it might be something really that you're against, and it's a belief or a value. So being authentic, um, it definitely builds trust. For leaders, that they're not just faking it, they're not going through the motions. They're living what they believe is really important to them. And their teams can feel that and they can see that.
Yeah, no, no, that makes perfect sense. And I don't know about your experience, but I find often in coaching conversations, before I can even get to that stage of, how do you live your values, there's often work about understanding what your values are. Because, just like you said, people have a reaction, whether it's emotional or something else, but they actually don't know what that reaction is from. So there's a bit of self-awareness around understanding what truly are your values, and then seeing how that's what's causing the reaction. So it's
Yeah.
just an interesting thing. And I don't know why, but it always surprises me that people haven't already done that work or haven't been able to clearly articulate, name, define what those values are.
Yeah, I found that too. And also, people often get their beliefs confused with their values, which for me are two different things. You have belief systems, some based on sometimes from experiences that maybe aren't valid, and you have an emotional response to a belief that isn't really a core value.
So, so true. We're actually just doing with a client, we're doing a series of workshops based on emotional intelligence. And we just came off a series, what was all about limiting beliefs and helping people to understand those beliefs. Yeah, so I really appreciate you bringing that differentiation into the conversation today.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you have emotional responses, you really have to be careful and you have to pay attention to what am I telling myself that has created that emotional response, which we'll get
Hmm.
into emotional consciousness, which is another one of the five brave virtues. But authenticity is really about knowing what those values are. And like you said, finding out what those values are can be a challenge if you haven't done the work. I was listening
Hmm.
to something the other day, and it was like the older you get, the more difficult it is to define your values because they've been clouded by life's experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. When I think that's why it's so important to create space, hence the name of the podcast, Space to Lead. Um, Regardless of what stage of life, what stage of our career, create space for us to check in with ourselves, pay attention, notice those things, because there is so much noise in the system. Yeah,
Nice, yeah.
love that.
So authenticity, I just have to add this Brene Brown quote because I love it because it sums it up perfectly. Authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we are supposed to be and embracing who we are.
Mm, love that.
Take the
And
mask off.
yeah, and to do that takes us, I think, right into the fourth element of the brave model, which is vulnerability, because to let go requires a bit of vulnerability.
It sure does. Vulnerability is the toughest one, I think, but it's also the most important one for building trust. So it demonstrates trust and it builds trust. But the way I define vulnerability is not, lots of people think I'm being vulnerable. I open my kimono to the world. I tell everybody all of my deep, dark secrets, but that's not what it is. It's about sharing when it's going to give a message, like you want to teach something or show something, and there's not going to be any harm to yourself in the process of doing that. And so it's things like for leaders, admitting that you don't know, admitting when you've made a mistake, and leaders find it difficult to do that, but it's so important, or they're struggling with something, they have a concern. It's so important to convey that bit of humanity because it means people recognize you as you don't know everything. So then they can say, I'm not sure, or maybe they can help. It just opens things up so much by
Yeah.
just admitting a few things about yourself that maybe you think you shouldn't share as a leader, but it's okay. And how do we get leaders to do that? To say it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to not
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. So, so important. And vulnerability is one of those ones where I find, and I'll tell you a story and then I'll tell you why I'm bringing this up. I remember when vulnerability first started being talked about in leadership circles. And I remember I was working for an organization, a bunch of us leaders were at a workshop. And following that, I always smile when I think about this. One of the leaders, I'm not kidding, for a period of time, every third sentence, they would start by saying, at the risk of being vulnerable, and then share something. And so for me, vulnerability is one of those things where for a while it almost was like a buzzword, and I've noticed sometimes people don't want to talk about it anymore. Yet to your point, it is so critical. So, getting this, I have to get this sort of mental block I have about, oh, that was a buzzword, flavor of the month. Everyone was talking about vulnerability to integrate it into leadership practice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's still, maybe it became a buzzword because it's so scary for most people, you know? And then all of
Yeah.
a sudden people are pushing, pushing, pushing it, but it's scary. So how do we take the stigma off vulnerability?
Hmm. And I liked how you described it at the beginning too, which kind of takes a bit of that fear or that threatening element of it away, how you described vulnerability and defined it at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. You don't have to share everything. Make sure it's not going to hurt you
Yeah,
before you do, right? And
yeah,
and you have to decide that. So it needs an environment of trust.
yeah, yeah. So true. So true.
It's a tough one though. I did it once in a group of my team that I worked with when I was in industry. Um, Accidentally, I became very emotional because they weren't with me. They were just didn't care what I had to say, and I was trying to lead them through something on emotional intelligence, which is tough sometimes. And so I kind of got really emotional, and I told them why. I said, I feel like I'm standing here and you don't care about what I have to say, that you're not engaged, you don't want to be here. And after I kind of let all that out, they all came back and embraced what I was doing. So even though I didn't really manage my emotions well, which we'll get into, I did was able to express my with vulnerability that I was feeling not cared about and not listened to,
Yeah.
which had a positive impact on how they viewed me after that.
Yeah, and what's so powerful about that story is, well, maybe it didn't feel great for you in the moment. It's clear that it interrupted a pattern or something that was going on in the room and sort of got people reconnected, which sounds like was very powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, love
And I'm
that.
not sure if I had not have had the emotional response, if it would have had the same impact.
Yeah.
So emotional consciousness is the E in Brave. And emotional consciousness is, for me, I think it's a bit deeper than emotional intelligence because it goes beneath managing recognizing and managing the emotion. You're able to manage it because you go to that, you make the unconscious conscious by understanding what belief triggered the emotional response. So between every response, you have an input and you have a response, and between every input and response is the lens of your beliefs.
Hmm.
And when you start to recognize that your emotional response is related not to what that person said, but the belief system that you have based on what they said, then you can start to manage it. So it's taking those beliefs and making them more conscious. And it is tough and it takes practice, practice, practice to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And self awareness and understanding, whoa, I have, like we talked about earlier, limiting beliefs.
Hmm.
What
Hmm.
was I telling myself when I was getting emotional with that group of people? They don't
Yeah.
care about me. Therefore, I must believe that I'm not worthy somewhere in there, worthy of being listened to. What I have to say is not important. All those beliefs. And then you go, wait a minute, that's not true. Where did that come from? And it kind of
Yeah.
changes the way you're able to respond to bad news or respond to tough circumstances when you can check those beliefs.
Yeah. Yeah. And so important because all that time that you're spending in your head, you're no longer present with what's going on in front of you.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So it sounds like, and of course we won't have time to do this today, although I'm sure we're going to talk about it in a future conversation. It sounds like there's a lot of experiences, probably the good, the bad, and the ugly, that led you to this place of being able to develop the Brave model and put this story on paper.
Oh God, yes. Yes. I have to what was I saying to um a friend that runs an addiction recovering center? I said, I've spent my entire life running away from addiction and toward mental health. And
Mm,
so my story is really about that. And as you're probably aware, addiction and mental health are closely linked. And so my story is about discovering myself through the trauma of addictive relationships and things like that. And my parallel work and personal lives that, well, they're not really parallel. My personal life was like shit, and my professional life was climbing and doing well. And so I had to figure out what was going on. And that's, I did a bunch of self-discovery work, hence the dragonfly is self-reflection, self-discovery, transformation. I probably transformed myself many times over my lifetime, still doing that, which you could call it transformation, you could call it personal growth.
yeah,
Same thing, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, and so when I came out of a really tough time and I left my career a couple of years ago, that's when I developed this leadership model. And I tried to link it to know yourself, be yourself, love yourself, um, and getting to be the leader and the person, because we're all leaders and we lead somebody. If you
Hmm.
inspire others to do better, you're a leader.
Yeah,
So, you know,
yeah.
so that's where, yeah, that's kind of where it came from. It came from I got to figure out what's going on, did some self-discovery work, started writing it down.
Hmm. Hmm.
How can I
And
help others with that, you know?
yeah, yeah, and I agree because the more that we, our personal or professional, all these different characters that make us up, the more that they're all in alignment, the more effective, satisfied, whatever we can be. So wow, that's really, really powerful. And I, stealing from the title of your book, I can imagine how brave you had to be to put that all on paper and put yourself out there in that way.
Yeah, it
So,
took some courage. And
yeah.
somebody asked me one time, how many Cindys are there? There's a Cindy at work, there's a Cindy at home, there's a Cindy with her family, there's a Cindy that goes, out in public. And I said, my goal is to have one and be that all the time, every day, and show up like that where no matter who I'm with. And that
Mm,
takes some effort. And that's authenticity.
yeah. Yeah. I suspect there's an entire conversation about being our true selves, being authentic. I'm not going to get into it now because we'll go down a bit of a rabbit hole, but I think it's a conversation
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
we should probably have at some point. As you think about this journey you've been on, this leadership development model, the Being Brave book that you've published, as you think about everything that you've learned, where would a leader start if they wanted to start doing some of the work that you've just described? What would be the first step?
I would say acknowledging that they don't know everything and there's room for growth. And the first step in personal growth is knowing who you are as a
Mm,
person on your own.
mhm, mhm.
Who am I really? What do I believe? Core beliefs.
Yeah, yeah. What I love about what you just said, because you use the word acknowledging, and acknowledging is not too scary. Versus if I think, oh, I must change or I need to fix, that feels very weighty and heavy. But if a gentle first step is just acknowledge, here's where I am today. It sounds safe.
It should
Beautiful.
be. I
Yeah.
mean, if you're a good leader, you have some probably, I shouldn't say if you're a good leader. If you're a leader in a leadership position, you got there for a reason. So hopefully you have some grasp of the idea of self and continuous improvement and personal growth and things like that. So it's just saying, it's time for me. It's time for me to do that. I think I can be better.
Hmm. Sounds like a really good final statement to bring this conversation to a close. But I am going to hold you to some future conversations, Sydney, because I've thoroughly enjoyed our time together.
Great. Yes, me too. You're really good at this, David.
I will edit that part out, I think. But thank you for saying that.
No,
And
no.
thank you so much for joining today.
It was a great conversation. Thank you.
If you would like to learn more about Cindy and the work she does, you can find her online at www.dragonflyinsights.com. And if you'd like to learn more about the Brave model, Cindy's book, Being Brave, is available on Amazon. Thank you for joining us on Space to Lead. See you next time.